Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about the A2 pulley injury. We know with research that the A2 and the A4 pulley are the strongest in the fingers. With climbing injuries, we're seeing a lot of injuries happen to the A2 pulley. You have actually two different flexor tendons in your fingers. So what allows you to do this is a muscle called your flexor digitorum superficialis, and what allows you to do this at the very fingertips is a muscle called your flexor digitorum profundus. So those two muscles actually originate from the forearm here and then turn into tendons. They travel through your fingers, and one, the superficialis, inserts on the sides of the base of your middle phalanx, and the flexor digitorum profundus starts here and it travels and it inserts right. The tendon inserts to the base of the distal phalanx. So you have those two tendons that ride along your fingers. If you did not have pulleys that are helping to keep those tendons in place, as you try to flex your fingers, there's going to be a big gap here called, they typically call it a bowstringing. We have 5 different annular pulleys. That's why they call them A1, A2, A3, A4, A5. A1 actually starts right here. So I'm going to draw myself a little A1 pulley there. Then the A2 pulley is roughly around here. A3 pulley right there. A4, and then A5. So you have these 5 different pulleys that help to keep the flexor tendon in place. So I'm going to also draw a little flexor tendon.
That goes along here, like so. Bam, bam, bam. And that right here inserts right at that point.
This, for example's sake, is going to be the profundus, what allows me to do this motion here. So essentially, when that muscle contracts, right, you can see my muscle flexing here. As I flex, it closes the fingers, right? When we climb, normally the flexor digitorum superficialis, that muscle allows you to do this, is stronger than the profundus muscle. And how does that relate to climbing? Well, I want to climb and be able to grab onto the rocks or different holds confidently. So I'm going to use a muscle that I know will allow me to stay on the wall. And we know that the superficialis muscle is a stronger muscle here. So when you're making big jug holds, like grabbing onto jugs, like that's typically you're going to feel confident in grabbing those. But when you start to come to more narrow edges, we not really used to doing this open crimp position because this is naturally a weaker muscle, right? And so what do we naturally incline to do? We either do a half crimp or a full crimp position like that. And over time, this is an okay, perfectly fine grip to use, the half crimp or the full crimp. But over time, you're going to wear those pulleys out if that's your go-to type of grip that you're always relying on. When you're doing this position here, right, we'll isolate the ring finger. Essentially, that pulley, the tendon is trying to pull away from these segments here, the different pulleys. And the pulleys are helping to keep that tendon close to the bone. So it's a mechanical advantage of allowing you to be able to flex your fingers. And when there's a gap, there's a little space right here, then you know this is going to be putting some stress to these pulleys. And it's typically we see A2 pulley getting injured the most. And in my practice, I see a lot of ring finger A2 pulley stresses. More recently, there have also been a study that indicated that their A4 pulleys are also more of an issue that has been strained. So how do I help to avoid stressing specifically my A2 pulley? Well, in climbing, you really want to try to have a variety of grips as you're climbing there. So instead of always relying on this half crimp position, what you want to do is really start to practice doing like an open crimp position. And this allows you to fully extend at your PIP joint and fully flex at the distal interphalangeal joint, the DIP joint. And that helps to decrease the stress to your pulleys as well as your PIP joints by helping to get more of a extended position at the PIP joint. So this is going to be another important grip as you're climbing. Not to always rely on the half crimp position, or even just constantly crimping down with a full crimp. But if you want to save your fingers and try to distribute the stress, you can either altogether avoid any type of crimping, right? Just to allow your fingers to rest, or just hang on jugs, or even practice slopey routes, right? But if you also want to still try to climb crimpy routes, then start to get a variety of different grips. So whether you're doing full crimp, not all the time, you want to maybe even do a chisel crimp or false open crimp, or try to do that full open crimp position like so. A lot of times I get the reasoning that, oh, it's hard to do that full open crimp because my pinky is a lot shorter than the rest of my fingers, and so is mine. To be able to allow yourself to have more alignment of these fingers, right? It's not a magic trick, but we have the ability to flex at this joint here, and not only flex there, but also to cup our hands. So what allows me to do this causes the fingers to be able to align a lot more evenly with one another. So when you're trying to practice the open hand crimp, I want you guys to try to extend at the wrist. Make sure you are flexing at your metacarpal phalange joint or your big knuckle joints here, and hold this position, right, so that you can get that pinky to become a little bit more even with the rest of the fingers instead of just slapping the wall like this. So by holding that position there, then you can start to delicately place your fingers on a decent edge so that you can start practicing this open crimp position and be able to save the stress of your A2 pulley or even your PIP joints there, right? How do I know that I may potentially be overstressing my pulleys? During your climb, you may not actually feel any pain along your pulleys here, but it's always afterwards. I hear this a lot, that when my patients come to me and they say, it normally doesn't hurt while I'm climbing, but it's always the day after or a couple days after there's swelling and there's a lot of pain around the base of my fingers. So that happens a lot, where when you're actually climbing, you may not feel that pressure when you're doing a lot of those half cramp, full cramp positions, but it's the aftermath that you may feel pain in the A2 pulley. A good way to tell that you may be overstressing your pulleys is to actually pinch it and test it out to see. So my middle finger, if you got the A1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and just poke around those regions, and you want to be able to pinch as hard as you can. Just get that strong pinch position and rub it around. If there's any areas where you feel like it's really tweaky, like, ow, that might hurt around that specific region, or if it's the A2 or A4, it's where it normally gets injured the most. And let's say one day after your climb for that week, this area starts to be really tender and painful to just even poke and pinch around. Well, if you compare that to your other fingers, as I pinch here, that really doesn't hurt too much, especially any of the other pulleys there, but for whatever reason, the middle finger ends up being really tender and almost feels a little swollen. Then you know that you've been climbing too hard. Normally the middle finger is actually the strongest of all your fingers. So you're working on some project and you've been crimping down really hard, and especially that area, when you're actually climbing, you may not feel pain there, but it's always afterwards, the aftermath of stressing that pulley may cause increased swelling to that area and maybe even straining the pulley itself. So you know that you overstressed it just by knowing that there's sensitivity to that area. If that is the case, then you want to make sure that you're not pushing yourself too hard for the next couple days or even a couple weeks, right? Not to say that you should completely altogether stop climbing. That wouldn't make any sense, but just avoid crimpy routes that cause you to do a lot of this half crimp position or even full crimping like so. And that will help to reduce the stress to your A2 pulley region of your middle finger, and give it a couple of days and then go ahead and pinch that same area, and it should actually feel pretty similar to the other finger, that middle finger, or even if you compare it to the other fingers in that same hand, then there should be as much or as little of that sensitivity when you're pinching it. If it still hurts, then give yourself a couple weeks before pushing it hard again, because you need to give your pulleys some time to rest. So I hope that was helpful. Be on the lookout for more videos on different injuries related to climbing, and I'll see you guys later.